Welcome to today's Expert Chat. I'm Ginny with the Understood team, and today we'll be talking about processing speed with expert Dr. Ellen Braaten. Dr. Braaten is the Director of Learning and Emotional Assessment Program at Massachusetts General Hospital. Welcome, Ellen. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm just great, Ellen. Before we get started, Ellen, please tell our viewers a little bit more about your background.
So I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist who also does research in learning disabilities and attention disorders. And so I do a lot of clinical work with evaluating children with learning and attention and emotional issues. But I'm also very interested in just how learning and attention and things like processing speed and working memory play into or affect children's learning differences. And so processing speed is just an area that I've become very interested in over the years because I see it as a very important component of a child's neurocognitive profile. So it's something that I think is just of interest from a research standpoint, but also from just a day-to-day life standpoint in terms of how fast we can get things done and how well we can execute tasks really play a big part in how successful we can be in school.
Yeah, and you wrote a book on the topic, as a matter of
fact.
I
did.
And what is the name of that book, Dr. Braaten?
It's called Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up, and it really does describe some of our research on kids who have what we call processing speed challenges, meaning that it takes them longer to get things done. It takes them longer to get things done in the verbal realm, in the visual realm, in the written realm. And for some kids, that means that they're having difficulties in all of the above. For some kids, they just have difficulties, for instance, in getting their thoughts out, either verbally or on paper, but they may be very quick motor-wise. So it's a complicated topic in a lot of ways. And in our book, we talk about how it affects different children in different ways in the academic realm, the attention realm, the social realm, and also in just family life.
So we'll be touching on a few of those topics, or hopefully many of those topics, as we get through this chat. Before we get started, I just wanted to let our viewers know that Ellen will be taking your questions throughout the chat. So if you'd like to type them into the chat box, that would be great, and we'll get to them, or as many of them, as soon as we can. All right, so first of all, I want to thank you for tackling this topic of processing speed. It's something that my own son has. He has low processing speed, which explained an awful lot. And of course, I knew nothing about it when he was first, you wouldn't say diagnosed, would you, Dr. Braaten?
No, I think it's more of a part of a profile than it's definitely not a diagnosis. And you're right. Until about the last 5 or 10 years, not a lot of people were even talking about this issue. It was just thought of as something that was interesting in a profile, but not anything that was actually the meat of the profile. And so your experience is not alone. That a lot of parents who've had their children evaluated over the years this has not been something that's been really brought to their attention as something that might be front and, right in the front of what we need to really be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's break this down a little bit then, or unpack it. When we talk about processing speed, Ellen, what are the main components? Like, what areas are there when we talk about processing speed?
So there are really 3 main components. One is our motor speed, how quickly we can physically do something. The other is in the verbal realm, how quickly we can organize our thoughts, how quickly we can come up with just the right word at the right time, how quickly we can hear what somebody is saying to us, make sense of it, and generate a response. And then the third big area is in the visual realm. And at a very simple level, it's how quickly we can kind of react to a stimulus. But it's really more than that. It's how quickly we can look at something up on the board, be able to translate it and write it down. Now, that example that I just gave you really pulled from all 3 of those areas, the visual, the verbal, and the motor. And a lot of what we have to do in a daily basis involves more than just one of those. But oftentimes when we evaluate a child for these issues, very often we find that there's that deficit is in one area in particular, and it's very good to know what area it is. If it's in the verbal realm and it's really like the language system that tends to get a little bogged down, it's good to know that that's where we have to intervene, and we can use perhaps their motor skills, their better motor skills, to kind of support their areas of weakness. So that's why it's really important to get an evaluation about where in this process is it more difficult for certain children.
Okay, and one thing I think parents would like clarification on, Ellen, is there a relationship between processing speed and intelligence?
No, there really isn't. In fact, there's somewhat of an inverse correlation in some ways, that a lot of times our intelligence really it's what helps us think through problems. It involves our major, you're looking at this in two big ways. It involves either our ability to talk through a problem or to kind of think through a problem without our ability to use words. So like to be able to go through a maze or do a mathematical problem or a probability kind of problem, they don't tend to use our verbal skills as much. So when we think of intellect, we're really thinking about how do we solve problems? How can we talk through them? How can we visually solve them? Processing speed really relates to how quickly we can do something kind of mundane. So it doesn't relate at all to the quality of our thinking. It relates to how quickly we can execute something. So, when we look at intelligence in our culture, we kind of tend to think of smart people as being fast, but that's a cultural issue. That's not a quality issue. So as part of our IQ test, we include a processing speed measure as a part of intelligence, but yet we also factor it out when we really want to get a sense of what's somebody's real ability to think through something. And when you think about it, a lot of smart people take a long time to think through problems. And in fact, this kind of slower processing speed can be an asset in lots of areas of life. We're slow, thoughtful, we're taking your time to come up with a really good idea is really important. However, if it's what the problem is how quickly you can write down the assignments for tomorrow's homework, and that takes you a long time to do, that's not intelligence. That's sort of simple processing speed.
So, and that is something that can and should be accommodated, and that's why we need to pay attention to kids that struggle with processing speed.
Exactly, because this sort of simple processing, whether it's, they're in a fast-paced classroom and it's a discussion and they've got to really be able to come up with a great answer really fast, and they have a great answer, but it takes them 5 more seconds to be able to organize their thoughts. They need time to be able to really show who it is that they are as a learner, and that is important for them to be accommodated so that it can kind of level the playing field so they can be on equal footing to those who have a little bit of a better ability to sort of do something kind of fast. But again, we're not really talking at all about quality. We're just talking about speed.
I would imagine that this would cause a good deal of stress for kids that are struggling with low processing speed, know that they can get to the answer, but everything is kind of moving a little bit too quickly. Do you find that kids with low processing speed do struggle with stress or anxiety? Ellen?
We do. And in fact, some of our early research is showing that kids with slower processing speed have higher levels of anxiety. And we're not really sure whether there's sort of a chicken or egg thing with that, if you're already a little anxious and it takes you a little bit longer, you're not getting things done in time, so you're feeling a little bit more anxious, which what happens when we get anxious, we kind of get slower, because that's a natural reaction. When we're anxious, it's our natural reaction to kind of look, stop, wait, and look. And that's a biologically driven, very adaptive sort of function that human beings have learned to have over the thousands of years as we have evolved. And so we're not sure if kids with anxiety have slower processing speed and higher rates, or just kids with slower processing speed develop anxiety. But we know that there is a relationship between the two, and they kind of feed off on one another.
Okay, that's important to know. We have lots of questions from our viewers, Ellen, so I'm going to try to get to as many as I can.
Great.
We have a question about whether slow processing speed means a global delay.
No, it doesn't. There's nothing in our research that we have. And again, our research is fairly new. This whole field is fairly new. But we've been following a group of kids over the last 8 years, and we do not find it, having slower processing speed is not highly correlated with a global delay in any way at all. Now, I think that it can be associated with a global delay, but it is not something that when you think slow processing speed, the global delay, they're not highly correlated. I think the other thing, and I'm not sure if this is what the person asking is really asking, but it's worth noting, is that slow processing speed can very much look like a global delay, because if it's taking you longer in every single area and you're always a step behind, it's going to seem like your child is fairly delayed in a lot of areas, even though, again, we're not talking about quality. We're just talking about the ability to kind of get through life. And so it can look like that a lot. But I wouldn't, if someone is saying, oh, my child it has been identified as having a global delay because they have slower processing speed, that's not an adequate idea or answer.
Okay. All right. Now, a viewer wants to know if there are ways to help a child with slow processing speed socially. So first of all, does it impact social life? And how can it be helped?
So yes, the answer is our research has shown that it does address social life. And in fact, at a higher rate than we actually thought. About 40% of the children in our sample had reported some kind of social issues. And it does affect social life because a lot of social interactions happen in quick real time, especially when we're talking about adolescence, pre-adolescence, and just think about the world we live in. It's a fast-paced world. You're looking on your phone, you're looking on Instagram, you're looking at who's tweeting what. And so if all of those things take you a little bit longer, you're going to be a little bit behind. So I think there are a lot of things that can be done to help that. If it's a really significant area of social skills problems, and sometimes kids with slower processing speed have other issues too, like ADHD or problems with social pragmatics, I think that there are very good tools that have been developed to really do a good job at remediating social pragmatics. But in the child who doesn't have that sort of major issue but still seems to stumble along in the social realm, I think some of the main things you can do is to make your child aware of social situations as best as you can. I think having them be aware of their profile and the pitfalls is a good one. It's actually a good one for any child to be aware of, to know that this is my Achilles heel in any sort of situation. So getting a little bit more information about where are social situations difficult? Are they more difficult in busy situations when there's a lot going on? If that's the case, give your child, pre-warn them as in terms of where they're going to go and what they're going to need to expect when they're there. I think also giving them the opportunity to practice skills. For example, sometimes kids get very anxious when they have to go to a restaurant. They're in a restaurant, they're enjoying, and oftentimes kids with slow processing speed have wonderful personalities where they're kind of like happy to be at the restaurant. They're looking around, they're enjoying what's going on. And then all of a sudden the waiter comes and says, well, what do you want to order? And they haven't given any thought to that because they haven't even looked at the menu. It's going to take them a little bit longer to figure out what they want. So practicing some of those things, knowing that, we're going to an Italian restaurant tonight. Give some thought to if you want pizza or pasta. And so that when they get there, they're already kind of pre-primed for that situation so that then they can enjoy the social situation that they're in, as opposed to people being frustrated with them that they aren't, well, how do you know what you don't want to order? We've been here for 10 minutes. And that happens too, just with same age peers, where they can't make up their mind about what it is they want to do for after school activity, or they have a play date. And so preparing them, getting them thinking ahead a little bit is a really good thing and can help sort of pave the way for a smoother social situation.
Okay, when you were talking about the restaurants, I'm thinking of the beauty of the online menu. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So
That's exactly right. Knowing that, I mean, just as a parent, being aware of where are these social situations tripping them up. I also think that we've given some thought to whether or not sometimes kids with slower processing speed might be bullied more often. We haven't found that to be the case, but it's something that we're always, we want to look at. But it would, give you reason to think that maybe if you have trouble kind of seeing danger because you're at a little bit of a different pace, you might want to just know, are there certain relationships that your child is struggling with, and kind of helping them and negotiate those relationships. Or maybe when they do have play dates, just having them have one or two friends instead of 6 or 7 over. Or, kind of really doing some hypothesis testing as a parent or in collaboration with the teacher to figure out how can we get a handle on where the social situation is getting difficult, helping them be more successful in that environment, and then sort of figuring out where their next step is to kind of push them a little bit socially too, so that they expand that ability.
Great advice. We have another question that I think is really good, and I think that you can really provide a lot of insight here. What is the difference between processing speed and memory issues, or what's the relationship? Is there a correlation between the two?
There is a correlation between the two. It's not perfect. So I've seen many kids who have good memory skills and poor processing speed, and vice versa. Kids who have very, poor, now I have to think of how I said this, but do you know what I mean? That you can have one without the other. There is a moderate correlation between the two, but I think that one reason why kids with slower processing speed may have poor working memory skills, sometimes not even in the evaluation, but in real life, parents will report this, is because think about it, our brain only has so much time to take in a certain amount of information. So for example, if somebody is telling you their phone number, which is a bad example because nobody tells anybody their phone numbers anymore. However, if they did, or let's say a shopping list, you only have so much time to kind of hold on to that. So if your brain is sort of taking that in a little bit slower, that information is what we call decaying in memory before you can hold on to it. So we think that may be what we're seeing in some kids with working memory and processing deficits, is that the processing speed itself is having an impact on their working memory skills. Another area where you might see that is in reading comprehension, whereas kids have good reading comprehension in general, but may complain about the fact that their reading is good, they don't have dyslexia, but that they complain about reading comprehension issues. And what we find is that sometimes that working memory and processing speed can affect them because they're a little bit slower at the reading comprehension. It's getting into working memory, but it's slowly decaying before the other information is coming in and they can make sense out of that. So we see subtle issues, even though in essence their reading comprehension is really it's not the comprehension, it's the other areas of executive functioning that are impacting that.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. This is a question about whether processing speed is covered under IDEA. So can a child with processing speed issues actually get an IEP or a 504, Ellen?
I love this question because it's really important. The simple answer, if it's simply a processing speed issue, the answer would be no. It's not really officially covered under IDEA. Now, in a younger child, we might be able to scoot it on by under some kind of like developmental disability, some developmental delay, but that's not a really good category for this anyway. What I recommend is getting a really comprehensive evaluation and finding out where the processing speed deficit is becoming a disability. So for example, in our research, we know that 25% of kids with processing speed deficits have a reading disability. Another 20% have a writing disability. Another it's like 25% have a math disability, and about 60% have ADHD. Then we also find that there are these other set of kids who don't really meet criteria for any of the things I just said. But if you actually really kind of push the boundaries of the assessment a little bit and really look at math fluency or just your ability to kind of really quickly write a story, I think that what I've been doing is identifying that area And then we can identify it as it might not be a typical reading disability, but it might be a specific learning disability in reading fluency or writing fluency or math fluency. And that's a way of identifying how the processing speed deficit is actually having an impact on a specific area of learning, which is important in order to get to fall under IDEA. If a child has ADHD, that's a better way of getting the label that will allow you to have services, even though underneath that label, it might be that it's really the processing speed issue that's causing them the most functional impairment, even more so sometimes than just the simple attention issues.
Okay, great. Another parent would like to know which evaluation should they request if they think their child has processing speed issues.
Now, did they mention if it's in the school or outside of the school?
We don't have that information. If the person that asked that question would like to clarify, we can report back.
I can address both. So the easy way, if you're going outside of the school, your best bet is to get a neuropsychologist who really can do a very comprehensive evaluation and can look at the subtleties that I was talking about in that last question about, okay, the child doesn't have a significant reading disability, but does processing speed affect their ability to read in certain situations, for example? A good neuropsychologist can kind of tease those out. But that's expensive. It can be 6 to 12 months before you can get an appointment, and your public school system is required to give you an evaluation if you ask for it. If you're getting an evaluation through the school system, the number one thing you always want to request is a test of intelligence. The best tests that look at this are the Wechsler scales, and the Wechsler scales have a processing speed factor as part of the battery of tests. So you want to request an intelligence scale. Sometimes some school systems will use what are the Woodcock-Johnson tests of cognitive abilities. Those can also be good too. I find that sometimes it's just easier to understand looking at the Wechsler scales. Now, in addition to that, you want to make sure that the school system does a very good job of looking at academic functioning, attention, and executive functioning. So what you want to ask for is a battery of tests that look at academic functioning, like the Woodcock-Johnson tests of achievement, the Wechsler individual achievement tests, and other tests that look at writing, math. And you want to make sure those are assessed very comprehensively, not superficially, because it's very easy if an evaluator only does tests of reading or writing that aren't timed, you're never going to find whether or not this processing speed factor affects your child in those areas of academic functioning when we're talking about speed. So you want to make sure that those kinds of academic tests are very comprehensive and include speeded measures. When we're looking at executive functioning, you also want to ask the evaluator at school if they feel like they've sufficiently evaluated executive functioning, organization, other measures of processing speed. And if there are other areas like language that you're worried about, you'd want to ask also about speech and language therapy. If there are motor issues that you're particularly concerned about, you want to ask for an occupational therapy evaluation as well.
Okay, and this can be done through the school or privately.
Exactly. And just ask. And if you feel like you've gotten it through your school system and they have not adequately answered your question, keep asking questions. Find out what tests that they could have given to assess the areas you feel like aren't adequately assessed.
Great. Perfect. Very good question. Can processing speed improve through therapy?
Well, that's unfortunately a sad answer, because the answer that I have right now is no. And I think this is the biggest frustration that parents have, is we can talk about this issue, but we don't really know what to do. And so, we're sort of at the knowledge is power stage. Look at how much you can make your life more efficient. Make sure you've evaluated any areas of academic functioning, any other learning differences, any other attention deficit differences that you can target. And because anytime you can address those areas and help, we know how to remediate, for example, dyslexia. There are lots of great tools and even medication, different sorts of things we can do to the environment to help kids with ADHD. use those tools in that toolbox. But there aren't really any strategies we know right now, or any kinds of computer things, no medications, no kind of prepackaged ideas that we can use to increase processing speed. I hope that we do at some point in the near future.
Right, that would be great.
It would.
Okay, so a child has been identified with slow processing speed. What should parents ask when talking to the school about accommodations? This parent says she understands that extra time on tests would be an accommodation. Are there other accommodations that parents should be focusing in on?
I think the number one thing they should do is to make sure their child has a good match. And I'm saying this now because it's the end of the school year and people are thinking about what's the next year's classroom like. I find that the number one key to success for kids with the slower processing speed is having a teacher who can understand this from a that this is a biological brain-based issue. It's not a motivational issue. It's not if they could only try harder or get more sleep or whatever. That's to sort of have a teacher who can understand that and to have a good pace between the teacher and the student is important. I also think decreasing busy work is important as well. Now, this is a tough thing because we're faster at anything that becomes more automatic. So the more practice we have, the faster we become at it. But a good teacher will know where that spot is between too much busy work and yet enough practice. I think thoughtful use of technology is another thing that parents should be aware of, depending on the age of their child. So, for example, you want to know, is your child at the age where using the computer would help the writing process, or would it slow it down? Is this for example, if you've got a first grader, they have slower processing speed and they have some motor issues, you're going to want to ask for occupational therapy. So depending on the age of your child and where their issues are. For example, speech and language therapy can be helpful for some older students who are still having trouble organizing their thoughts in real time. So I think you need to look at where your child's weaknesses were identified in the evaluation and then build the IEP around that. Extra time is sort of the thing that we recommend for everybody. And then lastly, one thing I want to just mention is just the idea about teaching them the concept of time. And that's something that we don't usually put in IEPs, but it can be a very important component of, we kind of think about time management. And I find that kids with slower processing speed have actual problems with not just managing time. Give them a calendar, that's fine. But if they have trouble sort of understanding what they can accomplish in an hour, what an hour feels like, what 5 minutes feels like versus 15, infusing that into the curriculum, it can be a really important thing. And even adding that to the IEP can be very helpful.
Okay. I know that for my son, when he was in high school, note-taking was very laborious for him, and he would come home with on his phone of pictures or photographs of what was written on the board, and I think that was really helpful for him.
Absolutely. That's something that we do recommend universally is if for older students getting help with, and that's a great use of technology, being able to just take a picture of the assignments on the board. Some teachers will not allow that. That's kind of, I don't know why, but they want them to write it down. But assistance with note-taking, that can even go on into college. I think being able to use voice recognition software for some kids. There are lots of different ways to use technology, but there isn't a one-size-fits-all for every student. And so I think that's where it's really got to be a very thoughtful approach. But there are a lot of good ways of cutting down and making life more efficient. And it just depends on each student.
Right. Someone wrote in and just wanted to clarify. You mentioned the 3 components of processing speed, Ellen. She mentions the motor, the visual. She's missing what the third one is. Can you enlighten? Motor, visual, and verbal. And verbal.
Sorry, okay. I'm sorry if I glossed over that. But verbal is very important. And they all kind of, like I said, they all work together. And most of the things we do in life pull a little bit from all 3 of those.
Okay, great. All right, we are running a little bit short of time. I'm going to try to get through the remaining questions, Ellen. All right, we have some questions about the ACT and the SAT tests. children with slower processing speed, can they get accommodations for these kinds of tests?
They can, if they have a specific impairment. The ACT and the SAT really looks for a functional impairment. And that's why when I was talking earlier about identifying where the processing speed impairment happens, is it in math fluency? Is it in reading fluency, writing fluency? And being able to identify that at a very young age is really important. The ACT, the college boards do not appreciate a parent coming in with a first-time evaluation done at age 16. If you're I could almost guarantee that you will not get extended time for your child. So one of the things you want to do is have a paper trail of evaluations that pinpoint those areas of functional impairment. And then you also want to have a paper trail that your child needed these accommodations throughout their school history. So that's why having the 504 in place as you go into a high school is important. If your child goes to a private schools also have accommodation plans in place. They're not official as a 504 is in terms of your legal rights, but private schools also should be putting that kind of formal plan in place so that when you go for extra time in the SATs and the ACTs, you have that. You need those two things. One is a current evaluation that has documented history of needing this, and then number two, a current plan in place that documents that that's something you use on a regular basis.
Okay, great. And a final question, a parent is asking whether processing speed in the verbal domain would impact a child in language arts as well as in math. So would this be something that would affect a child in all subject areas?
It really would. And you know, our math curriculums, depending on what kind of curriculum program that child is in, a lot of math curriculums are very heavily language driven. So if you're having trouble sort of getting the terms and the language of math, or you're having to explain math concepts in linguistic terms, you're going to struggle in all of those areas across the curriculum. This is one of those issues that can affect you across the curriculum, because little things like you mentioned with your son taking notes, well, that affects you in every single class. You could be a superstar in history, but if you don't get everything down because you're not a fast note taker, you're not always going to do well on the test, even though you have perhaps superior ability in that particular area. And that's where this can be a difference that affects you in many, many areas.
Okay, great. So that is all the time we have. I want to thank you, Ellen, for bringing this issue to light for parents, and thank you once again for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Ours too. For our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. If you've missed any portion of this chat or you'd like to watch it again, please know that we archive all of our chats at u.org/calendar. Thank you once again for being with us, and have a great day.